Hello, I'm Mr. Blinn. I'm a 5th grade teacher at Center Grove Elementary, and today we're going to be talking about how to add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. As a 5th grade standard, we actually have to touch on this. It's whenever we add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators, including mixed numbers, but today we're just going to focus on the fraction part. So for those of you who are new to fractions or struggle with fractions, just a quick refresher is the top number of a fraction is called your numerator and the bottom number of your fraction is called a denominator. So today, one of the biggest things that I focus on with my students is whenever we are adding and subtracting fractions, we have to have a common denominator, meaning that that denominator has to be the same for both fractions. So if you're looking at this problem here, we have 2/5 plus 1/4. You can clearly tell that we have two different fractions, or two different denominators. So as you can see, we've got 2/5 plus 1/4. We can't add these until we find a common denominator. So there's two ways that we can find a common denominator. There's one way where it's called the easiest common denominator, where we just find the product of both of those. But we focus more on what we call the LCM, which is the least common multiple. The way we do this is we take both of the denominators and we make a little chart. So we're going to take our 5 from this fraction and our 4 from the other fraction. The 1 and the x here stands for 1 times. So we know that 1 times 5 gives me 5. And we know that 1 times 4 gives me 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this chart going down to see when we can find a common denominator. So we're going to use multiples here. Now we're going to multiply 5 times 2. And we know that 5 times 2 will give me 10. And then 4 times 2 will give me 8. And we're going to keep going down the list until we find the same number in either column. Whether they match up or not, that does not matter. So we'll do 3 times 5, which is 15, and 4 times 3, which is 12, 4 times 5, which is 20, and 4 times 4, which is 16. 5 times 5, which is 25, and 4 times 5, which is 20. Now as you can see, we have 20 in both columns, both here and here. This is going to end up being our common denominator. So we're going to use the multiple that it multiplied that original denominator by that multiple to get our new denominator. So with that, we're now going to take 5 and multiply it by a fraction of a denominator of 4. And a big thing that I emphasize with my students is whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So we have 4 over 4. And now we'd have to do the same thing for the 4. 4 times 5 gives me 20. So we're going to have to multiply this fraction by 5. Now we can multiply these two fractions out together. 4 times 2, which will give me 8. And the denominator would be 20. And then we'd multiply 5 times 1, which will give me 5, over a denominator of 20. Now, our next step is a big, crucial one. You make sure when you add and subtract fractions that you only add the numerators. You never add the denominators. Or subtract the denominators. So 8 plus 5 gives me 13 over 20. So the answer to 2/5 plus 1/4 would end up being 13 over 20. So for another example, this time we'll do a subtraction problem. If we're looking at this problem, we've got 5/8 minus 5/24. So we can't do this problem until we have a common denominator. So we're going to take our two original denominators, 8 and 24, and put them in our chart. So 8 and 24, and we know 1 times 8 will give me 8, and 1 times 24 will give me 24. Now we're going to work our way down the chart again, just like we did the first time. 2 times 8 will give me 16, and 2 times 24 will give me 48. Now 3 times 8 will give me 24, but I don't need to continue any further because we have a common denominator now. We found what multiple will give us a common denominator of 24. So now I have to look at what I multiplied 8 by to get 24. I multiplied it by 3. So I would have to make a fraction of 3 over 3, because whatever I multiply the bottom by, I have to multiply the top by. And then since this one I did not change, it multiplied itself by 1, because we know that 1 times anything is just that number. So now we'd multiply 3 times 5, which is 15, over 24, minus 5 over 24. Now we can actually subtract our fraction out. Remember, the denominator does not get subtracted or added ever. Only the numerator gets added or subtracted. So 15 minus 5 would give us 10, and our denominator would stay the same. And these are just a few ways on how you can add and subtract unlike denominators.